We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in the Catskills, and I am very pleased to have Roswell Rudd with me today, who is most likely one of the most creative trombonists in jazz history. I think I can safely say that. That's all right with you.
That's fine, as long as it'll get things rolling.
Yeah, that's right. We gotta get things rolling somehow. It seems interesting to look at your career and know that you started playing Dixieland and went about as far in the spectrum as you could, it seems like.
Yeah, my father and those records that I was telling you about were the first music that I heard, and in the home, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think basically that's what it was. It was, there was Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton and some New Orleans characters in there too, but I think mainly what I remember best, it seems that he had the most records of people like Jack Teagarden and Max Kaminsky, Bud Freeman, the Chicago guys, Duke Ellington in the 30s kind of records, late 20s and 30s. Because don't forget, I wasn't born until 35, so when I started dancing and prancing around the room while my father was drumming to these records, those were the ones. I mean, those were the Au Courant 78s. We weren't actually going back. That's when they were.
That's what was happening.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. That was the sound of the time.
Was his collection include this swing bands a la Glenn Miller, or was that a little too commercial?
Benny Goodman. And Benny Goodman Trio, Benny Goodman Quartet. Yeah, I remember those distinctly. Yeah, those are good.
So you kind of had that swing rhythm become a part of you at a young age.
Yeah, yeah. You could always hear the bass drum throbbing, playing those quarter notes, anywhere within 100 yards of the house. Even if you heard nothing else, you could hear that pulse.
Some things don't change because that's what you hear going down the street these days with the kids in their cars.
The pulse, yeah. Yeah. Isn't it amazing how everything just goes on around that pulse?
Mm-hmm. But you were attracted to the brass instruments early on. Started on the French horn, is that correct? Yeah,
in Clinton Grammar School in 1946, I believe, I started playing the mellophone. That was the only thing that wasn't being played, and so Mrs. Grunert said, I think you have the lips for this.
Especially because it's the only instrument left.
Right, but they had to find somebody with the right lips. And that was a great experience, playing with the fourth grade band at Clinton Grammar School.
Yeah.
And after doing that for a while, as I said, they got a French horn for me because they're related, you know. The mellophone is like a half-size French horn. And the band director for the regional band at the big high school, which was sort of maybe a half a mile away in the town there, was recruiting all the time to keep this really huge concert stage band going, you know, feeding in from other schools in the region. And so he sent over a French horn and got me started on that. And then whenever they had a rehearsal, there was always somebody to take me over to the high school, or a car, or a way to rehearse with the high school band, and this big concert band. And it was really a thrill. I didn't read then, so what I did was learn my part by ear.
No kidding.
From the other person that was playing, because every part was doubled. You see, there were two people on each part. So the other guy was older and more experienced and could read. And so I just shadowed him all the time until it got tight.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just worked together that way in
Wow.
tandem, and eventually I, got more experience and learned how to fend more for myself.
Uh-huh.
But that's how I broke into it.
That's an interesting and probably important couple years to develop into a jazz musician, to develop that innate sense of hearing.
Yeah, it's fun. You're right. I did not come from the direction of playing from written music.
Mm-hmm.
I came from the direction of dancing to those records while my father played, and remembering the sounds, just getting off on the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so pretty soon enough sounds got into my body so that they started to build up in and of themselves. And so the reading, which came later, was not the primary thing for me. It became sort of an attached facility to the actual sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it also became a way to get into certain kinds of music through reading. But most of my musical experience came from jam sessions and recordings, radio and later television, but mostly some kind of acoustic source
Uh-huh.
that would then feed into my body and free associate and build up in there as it does.
Uh-huh. Did you hear, you told me you heard some jazz concerts at Hamilton when you lived there.
Yeah, there was that one concert which I think was in the winter of 1948. I could be mistaken, it might be 47, I'm not sure. But right in there, 46, 47, 48, when a group came up from New York City, and I remember who they were very distinctly, because I sort of had my eye out for these characters, and I was wondering if I would ever be able to see or hear them in my life. We had
Mm-hmm.
recordings of them. And this would be Max Kaminsky on the trumpet, who was one of my big favorites, and Tony Parenti on the clarinet, Miff Mole on the trombone, who was just a monster of a trombonist, and Pops Foster on the bass, great stylist. James P. Johnson, who was the teacher of Fats Waller and other people, and Danny Alvin on the drums.
Wow.
A real funky sort of, I guess you'd call it, ethnic drummer from Chicago.
Oh. Well.
And they rocked the house.
Yeah.
I'd never heard the stuff live, really. My father used to have friends over to play, and so for the first 10 years of my life, any live acoustical music that I heard was probably my grandmother playing hymns, and my father drumming to these records,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing friends over
Right.
to have sessions. But this was like the first real jazz band I ever heard,
Wow. Tell me about, you ended up at Yale, is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. I went through the public school system for a while. Then in the town I grew up in, Lakeville, Connecticut, they had scholarships to private schools there for people in the area. If you could pass the entrance exam, they would take a limited number of kids from the region. And the thing that kept you in there was grades.
Oh.
You didn't have to pay, you see. There was a fund. So the idea was to keep the grades up, and then that was a feeder school for Ivy League colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I got launched into Yale.
I guess you kept your grades up then.
Well, they weren't that great, but they were good enough.
Mm-hmm.
They were good enough to slide me in.
Well, as I'm looking at, I took some notes on your career and some of the recordings that I own myself, and it said in 1958 you played with a Dixieland group called Eli's Chosen Six.
Eli's Chosen Six. I was playing with them a year before I actually went to Yale, because I knew some of the people in there. There was a bass player named Buell Neidlinger. You might know his name from stuff that he did with Cecil Taylor and other people. And he spent, I think, a year at Yale. But during that year, he invited me to play with them. So I would come down from Hotchkiss School, where I was in Lakeville, Connecticut, and do gigs with them, Vassar College, different colleges that they played at. And it was very exciting for me. But Buell was the key to getting me involved in that.
Now, it's described as a Dixieland band. Was it fashioned after New Orleans Dixieland or Chicago, or was it just kind of its own conglomeration of styles?
I would say it would have to be more like a Chicago-style band. Because our main connection with the acoustical model, the living model, would have been the Eddie Condon guys in New York City, and that would be Wild Bill Davison, Pee Wee Russell, Vic Dickinson, Cuddy Cutshaw, all those great trombonists, and George Wetling. When I was just over in Europe this time, the piece that I wrote was for George Wetling. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was great because there's a drummer over in Holland. Even though he's a very young guy, he's always been a big fan of George Wetling, and so he was able to recreate some of George's classical performances of different songs. So I made it so. I write for. When I write for bands, I write in a style that I don't really have a name for, but it's best described as collage. I like to draw from all different eras, so you never know what's going to jump up. And in this piece, you find George Wetling right up in your face, and on either side, some pretty mad bop, and maybe something from New Guinea. You know, you just don't know what's going to happen with my stuff, because like I say, I've been the recipient of all kinds of sounds now for 62 years, and there's a whole lot rattling around in me, and some of it hasn't quite fused yet, you know. Some of it is still in the separate entity that it was when it went in there. And so a lot of times I'll just bounce around and do some funny time warps. Mingus would do that, and Sun Ra. There are plenty of people that just get very eclectic for a minute, you know. And it's a way of getting people's attention, you know.
Right. And so you must, in some cases, I think a writer might, if you're writing something and all of a sudden this thing comes out from left field, some writers might say, no, I can't put that in here. Seems like with you, you say, yes.
Oh, yeah.
That came out, so here it comes.
I believe that the more things that you try to put together that don't go together, the better it is for the world. I'm a stone Pythagorean. I believe that harmony is the greatest thing, and the way that you make harmony is by putting different things together. And you have to, but there's a precautionary note there in that you have to understand how the stuff goes together when you're putting it together. You know, you're a high alchemist. You just don't throw stuff together and you know, blow up a whole continent of people and then say, whoops, I'm sorry, you know. You know what I'm saying? You try to understand as much as you can before you release it back into the world. and that's why it becomes a science, or a study, or a philosophy, or a music. But that's harmony. That's harmony. People have been trying to do this for 7,000, 8,000 years, as far as I know, as a science. But then, the further back they go, the deeper they dig, the clearer it gets that there hasn't been that much change in human behavior, and this is something that everybody's wrestled with from the dawn of, life, I guess.
In the 50s, were you at all attracted to bop and the kind of explosion that was occurring with that music?
I would have to say that I was, from my own emotional understanding, that the swing music, say, of Roy Eldridge, Coleman Hawkins, and that kind of thing would have been the sort of like the cutting edge for me, even though the Bird and Monk and so forth were already out there and changing things. When I heard Parker with the Jazz of the Philharmonic, you see, there wasn't too many. It was very hard to get into the clubs as a kid, but you could go to these concerts like Jazz of the Philharmonic, and that's where I heard Parker, and I knew that he was very eloquent, and that his thing was expertly controlled, and that he had incredible skill. I just couldn't relate to it emotionally, but it went into my body. I think I understood it later, because he delivered. It was so right as a piece of communication that even if somebody didn't understand it, or even if they hated it, it would probably go into their body. It was that good, It was really traveling, and it was really rounded, a real finished piece of work. And so I came to understand him later, and the same for Fillius, and I think the one individual that helped me bridge the gap between what you would call modern jazz and the more traditional jazz or the swing was Herbie Nichols, a pianist that who was my friend for about the last 3 years of his life, and he was right. He sort of covered the whole thing. I mean, what is it about timelessness? I mean, you can't really say he was this style or that style. He was kind of like me. He was pieces of other people, pieces of other styles, music, Bartok, Stravinsky, Ellington, Gershwin. He was really a collection of West African, West Indian, and American, New York metropolitan area, classical, European, East and West classical, I mean, I just can't put my finger on it. It was a melange. And so what he came up with sort of takes you all over the place in a way. But he had tremendous integrity, so that it all hangs together somehow, But it was wild to me. But I think he was the guy that opened me up to. He was a contemporary of Fillius, a champion of Fillius within a year of each other. So I think through him I got more just
Attuned
opened
somehow?
up, opened up more, opened me up more to receive more. And there was a year, say about 1960 or 61, where I was just having all this music pour in on me. And I never even stopped to think, where am I going? What am I doing? Is this the right thing? Is this the hip thing? Is it, I didn't. I never stopped. I just kept absorbing and absorbing. And then, when I wasn't with these people or following them around, I was up in my garret transcribing Ellington arrangements or Strayhorn, or just trying to learn, because Yale really didn't prepare me for real music.
Right. You were about 25 at that time.
Yeah.
Was it hard to live in New York at that time? What were you doing to sustain yourself?
The first job I had when I got to New York was Customs House messenger. I found a cold water flat, $15 a month on an old block right around the corner from the Customs House before they all tore that down and put a bank there. I was on the lowest part of Broad Street, right down on the waterfront. And I would get up, do the day thing, and the rest of the time just play, follow these other guys around, and study. Did that for a couple of years anyway.
You have to have some intense longing for the music to pay those kind of dues.
Yeah, I knew, and the thing was, Monk, I knew that I was behind. I knew that I was, that somehow that spending those 4 years in college and maybe the high school before that, I felt somehow that I should have been doing this a lot sooner,
Yeah.
and doing it just as intensely, but a lot sooner. So it took me it took me longer than I wanted to get there. So once I got there, I felt like I really had a lot to do in a short period of time to be able to catch up to what was happening. Because I had a friend like Steve Lacy who grew up in New York City and was around this music from the time that he was a kid. And he went to high school, and I think he may have gone to Berkeley when it was called Schillinger School for a year or something like that. But basically, he was just playing, getting around these guys and picking things up, and just getting as much as he could into his body and under his fingers. And so I had people like Lacy to look up to and see the kind of progress they were making, and I felt like I was a turtle compared to them,
Well, do you think it's, your name is certainly a part of the circle of musicians at that time in the 60s and so forth that was known as free jazz. And do you think that's a correct term?
Is that a term that they used back then?
Well, that's a darn good question, and I don't know if I can answer it, although you certainly had the record by Ornette Coleman called free jazz.
Oh.
And I think it was a term. Of course, the terms usually follow the music after it's been going for a while.
Yeah.
But I think it was a term that caught on much as bebop was,
Mm-hmm. See, I think of free jazz, that's like a redundancy. It's like two things that mean the same. And I know that I never, in all the times that I wrote pieces or would be verbalizing to other musicians what I wanted to do when we were playing, I said, I'd like this to be a free section. I want the blowing to be free, but I never said free jazz. That was the thing. But I did use the word free.
Mm-hmm.
free. That's why the term free jazz. I mean, jazz has always meant freedom to me, and freedom has always meant freedom. So when you say free jazz, like say it's like double redundancy.
Yeah.
It's a great phrase, you know.
Uh-huh.
But I'd never thought of the two words being together until somebody asked me the same question within the last 2 years. You know, did you ever use the label free jazz for yourself?
Right.
And the answer is no. I would use free and I would use jazz, but I never thought of putting the two together.
That usually comes to somebody else to describe what you do, and people who do it don't describe it.
Yeah.
They're just doing it.
Yeah.
They're following their own whatever. I'm not sure what to call it.
Yeah, it's like saying alligator, crocodile, or something like that.
Well, here's a good example. I wrote down a quote about you in the Grove Dictionary of Jazz.
Okay.
And it says Roswell Rudd has brought to free jazz many of the qualities more often associated with early jazz trombone, including a large warm tone and earthy vocal sound, punctuated by growls and a deeply felt sense of rhythm.
Okay.
It's quite a statement, huh?
It's all one sentence.
Yeah. Seems to be saying that you encompass a lot of jazz history by playing in a fairly free style, but with some of the early qualities of people like Jack Teagarden, perhaps, and those early trombonists.
Yeah, why is this? That was the music that was in the house. And the first stuff that I heard, I told you, was the old recordings. Not 1950s Louis Armstrong recordings, but Louis Armstrong on old 78s, Jelly Roll Morton on old 78s, Ellington on Vocalion or something, 30s, RCA, Columbia Records, that were actually coming out at that time in the middle 30s.
Yeah, this wasn't history. This was
actually
current
it. So
music.
I started being nourished this way, and then it wasn't like a thing where I had to later on in my life go back to study the early jazz. I was sort of in it when I was a kid already. Although I must say I have heard other recordings and I have made more researches into the past, but I already had a pretty solid foundation in that when I was a kid. And don't forget, one of my personal favorites of the same time as a kid coming up was Spike Jones. I mean, that was my input. This other stuff was from my father. But my music, my personal favorite, was Spike, you see. And it was, I think, maybe Duke Ellington that's prepared me for Spike, because if you listen to the early Ellington recordings, you got a lot of funny voices on there. Plunger horns.
Yes.
It's like very talking, lots of colors, lots of funny segues and leaping and jumping, and I sort of equated those two things together as a kid, because when you're a kid, you love cartoons, and you love that kind of vibrancy.
Yeah.
You need a lot of colors. As a kid, you expect a lot of colors, and that was all in the mix.
That makes so much sense to me that you tell me that Spike Jones was a favorite.
Definitely Spike.
Because as you describe your own writing, that sometimes things will come out of
this
it. Experience.
I still have pratfalls in my writing. I'm still there's Chaplinesque and the old Keystone Cops and all that stuff.
Yeah.
is part of my early training, and it's always been there. It's always been there. I have never been able, nor would I want to, try to eliminate it or eradicate it from my experience. And when people ask me, what is that, I could be playing what they call free or avant-garde, and they say, well, where did this stuff come from? And I said, it comes from the early Duke and Spike Jones and a lot of other stuff, if you don't mind,
Well, you've, over the years, played with some pretty fierce saxophone players, too.
Oh, great saxophonists. I've always tried to be around great saxophonists.
I'm wondering if, how do I put this? The technical, I don't know if limitations is the right word, but what it takes to play a trombone with the same speed that it does a saxophone. Did you ever feel that the instrument itself was a hurdle for you in trying to play with saxophonists?
See, to me, the primary instrument, the instrument that was really like an oracle for me in the music was the piano. Were the great pianists. They had the polyphony that they could do. They could put combinations of tones together. And to me, the real intrigue was sort of in the harmonic dimension. And so the saxophone was sort of midway between the piano and me. And I looked to the saxophones to sort of as the messengers of the piano genius. It was a way of they were in the stream of translation from what could happen with the what these guys were cooking up on the keyboard. The saxophonists then made possible a translation that other horn players could pick up on. And I think that's why I was really attracted to the saxophone players, because then I would take what the saxophone players were doing, and I'd distill it even further to get it down to where I could handle it. And I found ways where I could participate in what they were doing, but maybe without 10 fingers on a pipe, I would have to find other ways to connect with these harmonic keys. Well, that's another redundancy, but these harmonic ingredients, these harmonic components, help me, Monk, help me. These harmonic things, harmonic phenomena. I could still be in the ballpark with the saxophonist, yet the trombone brings in a whole other quality that's more natural to the instrument, which I call singing, and therefore the singing combined with the harmonic innovativeness made, to me, was what brought about the great jazz trombonists of this century, because they brought all the vocalization, combined that with the harmonic innovation from the system, put that together into melody, rhythm, and sound, and color, and created a whole unique music. It's in the trombone playing, more than the saxophones, or more than in the trumpet, and at least I think so.
Yeah.
But everybody's picking up on everybody else. There's a language circulating all over the place, and you hear something beautiful, and you just want to be able to do it yourself, and so you go ahead and try. But with the bone, you can't play every note of a Coltrane saxophone solo, you know. But you find ways maybe to get certain shapes here and there and certain dynamics, and then you bring the trombone vocalization to that, and you have another music.
Mm-hmm. In listening to the little bit I just heard you play in the other room,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed two things that I thought really stuck out for me, and that was you seem to be creating melodies with some patterns in them,
Mm-hmm.
that you were building upon what you had just played,
Mm-hmm.
and that you also felt that a space now and then in your solo was important,
Yeah.
that not playing would set up something to play next, or as an answer to something you had played, to put a space there.
Yeah. The call response is the thing that I teach right at the beginning, and the idea with this is that it's better to wait if an idea doesn't come right away. And then you have the advantage of being with 1, 2, 3, 4 5 other people. And this is a great chance for some kind of dialogue to happen. And this to me is basic in the music. If I don't hear the call and response, and the music never has a chance to breathe, it eliminates one of the great ways that I have of getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
If I hear the call and response going down, if I hear the talking going back and forth, you know, players acknowledging to each other that they hear what they're doing, I hear you, and here's what I say back, you know. When I hear the give and take, I'm in there right away. When I don't hear the give and take, I have to look for something else to grab onto. But the give and take gives me an automatic way, you know, wonderful, easy way in there. So even though I've, say, heard some pretty wild little bands, for instance, here's a wild little band. Albert Eiler on the tenor and soprano saxophones, with Cecil Taylor on the piano, Sonny Murray on the drums, and Louis Rell on the bass, playing together in a coffee house in Greenwich Village in 1961 or something, you know. They're talking.
Wow.
Yeah. And otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been able to get into that, you know, because the sound was like this to me, you know. It was a lot of sound, probably more sound than I'd ever heard from such a little band before.
Mm-hmm.
But they were, even though they were really filling the space, they were communicating with each other.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they were just like firing off guns and stuff, musically, with each other.
If someone who, kind of like jazz, was trying to get into that music that you're describing and most likely would have problems, is that what you would tell them, to try to understand how they're conversing with each other?
I would say listen for that, you know. Listen for some kind of dialogue. Listen for one guy to say something and see what comes back.
Mm-hmm.
See if the components are responding to each other with what they do.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to get any more literal than that.
Right.
And then if I say if you can't do that, maybe you can get off on the sound, on the emotion, the totality of the thing. And it certainly had that. It was a huge sound.
Yeah.
And screams that would go right through an ordinary person, and probably make them jump up and spin around a few times and then run out. I saw that happen. I saw people reacting that way to Cecil's music one night when he got into a vortex and somebody got up from their table and started saying, this is shit, I can't stand it, and went into a vortex themselves and ran out into the night. But that same person came back and they couldn't get rid of it. Came back night after night after night and sat there respectfully and wouldn't go away, you know. Became a regular.
Guess they were getting something they needed.
Exactly. And I think that's what happens with music on different levels, that people get changed, people get healed, they get revelations, they probably find out more who they are and what this whole thing is about, you know, through art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the, in 1964 perhaps, the October Revolution in jazz?
The October Revolution in jazz was the idea of Cecil Taylor and Bill Dixon to get a lot of us together who were not able to find work in the music in the venues of New York City, and thought that, well, if we could gather together, that maybe we could open things up for ourselves. And we were together long enough to initiate a series of concerts that I will never forget, and people from all over the states came to hear it. And it all happened, I think, in 1964. Yeah, it would have been the fall of 1964. And when the initial series was done, then we went on to have nightly concerts in the dance studio that still exists on the top floor of the same building where the Village Vanguard is.
Wow.
Edith Stevens Dance Studio is what it was then. And we played on into the spring up there with different combinations. And there was it brought a real to me, when Sun Ra and Bill Dixon, Mike Mantler and Burton Green and myself and all these different people were brought together into one place, it gave me a sense that there was something going on here, you know, that it wasn't just some kind of, that we weren't some kind of isolated entities, you know, struggling in a void. I really got a sense that that there was a connected thing going on, minds meeting, a cultural reality of more than one vote, you know?
Yeah.
And that gave me a lot of encouragement. On the other hand, there was, because all of these people had developed their own ways of survival and doing business, etc., it was very hard for them to do, you know, when they all got into a room together and they finished saying, you know, how you doing and what's going on and all that, then you get into some fierce discussions and some pretty fierce arguments, and then it became more like group therapy kind of a thing. And so it was hard for all the egos to submerge themselves to the common goal of opening up more venues, getting federal grants, and whatever it is that you know, that you have to have in the way of support to make something happen like this.
Yeah.
But at least we were able to initiate something, had a good beginning and a lousy follow through.
Uh-huh.
But as many philosophers have said, it's just the beginnings are the main thing. There are really no endings. The thing is to begin and see where it goes.
I recently read a book, oddly enough, written by a couple of French writers about jazz, and they indicated that free jazz was very connected with black civil rights and an angry expression of it. Do you think that's a correct statement?
Connected with black civil rights and angry.
It was angry music that was very much a civil rights statement.
I was a freedom rider quite a bit in the 60s. I mean, I would tell my employer that I would have to go out and march and protest, and he understood. And so I would go up to Harlem, get on a bus, and go down to D.C. and further down than that, and try within 2 or 3 days to make some kind of contribution, but mainly to try and to talk to other people in this and try to get a clearer picture of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would have to say that yes, there was protest, yes, there was frustration, yes, there was injustice, yes, there was anger, there was rage, there was hysterical laughter, there was cynicism, this just brought out everything that was happening in people. My feeling was that it could definitely be a better world, that America was not the dream that it was cracked up to be, that I was fed when I was a kid. So when I was 30 years old and I was looking at my situation, I said there's, I think, room for a lot of improvement here. And one of the things that I can see that would really improve my situation is if what I was doing and these other folks that I'm doing this with is that it would be given the same kind of recognition in this culture that it was being given in other cultures. The civil rights part of it is something that I felt maybe as a WASP. And by WASP, I'm talking about white Anglo-Saxon Pythagorean. Maybe as a WASP, I could not relate to civil rights in the same way as an ethnic minority in this culture. But as an artist, I could relate to the frustration of another artist, you see. I could not relate as a white person to a black person about civil rights, because they would be coming from an entirely different background from me, with an entirely different set of opportunities and so forth. But as far as being artists who were not being recognized for what they had to do and were doing it nevertheless, I could relate to that frustration.
Yeah.
And so I have to say that that's where I connect into the civil rights.
Yeah.
As an artist, more than as a white person's trying to be in a black person's moccasins or something like this.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
I'm an artist trying to be in another artist's moccasins, and when we're artists, we're all wearing the same set of moccasins in a sense, okay. And that's how I felt then, and I think my friend Archie Shepp, who everybody said was very militant, controversial, and angry and so forth and everything else. Whenever I had this discussion with him, he'd just say, "We're both artists, and we're both having the same problems that artists have in this culture. And it's not about white and black so much as it is that there's just a problem with art in American culture, in American society. Americans really don't know how to consume art. They just don't. Art is something that is just recently starting to integrate itself into this culture. Just recently, you know. Everything has been transposed from Europe here for years. And now we're finally getting to, so that we look back on the daddies of American music.
Yeah.
Carl Ruggles, Charles Ives, Duke Ellington, and Charlie Parker, names that most people don't even know, because they had to do other work to get their music out there. They, you know, Ives published his own music. Ruggles got a few pieces out there, sort of like years and years after they were done. You know what I'm saying? It's a long, hard struggle.
Do you think it takes a country a certain number of centuries to get to that place where the arts have more of, I mean, America's not an old country when we compare us to European countries.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We inherited the legacy of Europe, and for the elitist society of America, European music was the standard. And it's only just recently that people are beginning to question that. Is this old music that we inherited from Europe, is this the standard that we should hold up for ourselves now in 1998, going into the second millennium and so forth? Are we still going to genuflect to these old values? Or are we going to look at what we actually have and build off that? You know, and when we have a very, very, very rich musical culture here, or a very rich artistic culture, but it's been largely ignored because of the legacy that was brought here from Europe, you know, by the Europeans who invaded this country 400, 500 years ago.
In your experience in playing in Europe, was the music you were playing accepted more readily?
Oh, yes, of course, of course. When I first went to play in Europe, actually I went with a college band in '58 and played and just drifted around and played over there. But I realized that improvised music was nothing new to Europeans. And if you had a gift for improvisation, you would really turn, you know, you would be paid special attention, because then you were sort of in the line of great European composers, because, well, let's go back to an earlier time in music, before there was not that much writing, but music was rote music. Improvisation was a key element, and you had to have improvisers to generate the music in the first place. Then later on, after sort of in the high Baroque, you get more and more emphasis on fixed ensembles and a whole lot of writing and stuff getting scripted out. And so eventually, by the time of Mozart, he's the only guy that's improvising. The composer's the only guy, you know, doing his own fantasy, and everybody else is,
Oh, yeah.
you know, he's scripting out his fantasy to everybody else.
Right.
So there's not a hell of a lot of improvisation going on with the individual players. There's more emphasis on the composer's improvisation. But at least one person is still improvising, and in Europe they know this, that the music comes from improvisation, comes out of nowhere. And so the jazz music, let's say, for the Europeans was something that was not a leap for them to accept this into their culture. And in fact, it fit very nicely because the improvisers were the geniuses in European culture.
Yeah.
And so it didn't matter whether it was an American genius or a South American genius or a Siberian genius or whatever, as long as, if this guy was just magically pouring out music from nowhere, this was mystery enough for them. They were happy with this. And so you have, people like Coleman Hawkins being very successful in Europe at a time when things were very lean for him here, and sort of getting stuff together over there and then coming back over here and having some kind of a life later on, maybe.
Yeah.
But Europe is different. Europe didn't inherit anything unless it was from the Mongols or something
Right.
before that, or the Babylonians,
Right.
or something. They've more or less had that going for a long time, much longer than we have here.
Yeah.
So that part of, growing your own art culture from the ground is just starting in America, I feel. End of this century,
Yeah.
just starting. There's been such a dominance of the European ideals artistically in this culture, and when we've had this great native artistic culture that has just been sort of like pushing up and pushing up and pushing up, pushing up, pushing up, and irrevocably it's going to be known, it's going to be seen, it's going to become the thing that it is, which is a native national art form,
Yeah.
or way of art, or just a great big bag full of art. But it's coming from here, not there
Yeah.
necessarily, but basically from here.
You think it's healthy for jazz that it has found its place in a college education system, and that we have jazz at Lincoln Center and all that?
It was inevitable, and I was glad to see it finally get to that point. When I was at Yale University, there was nothing there, and then after I left, I saw that Gunther Schuller had come in there, and he was teaching, and I said, well, things are hopeful. And then he brought up Diz and Max Roach and the Duke, gave them all honorary degrees. I said, now it's really looking good. I think I'll go back to Yale.
Right. Maybe you won't feel it was like a waste of time then.
No, I had a hard time because improvisation was considered recreational music at Yale.
Oh.
There was no place for it in the curriculum, and it was something that you did after dinner in the lounge of the
Right.
of the mess hall. So it wasn't something that was really being encouraged or really being taught, which is kind of hypocritical, as I began to see more and more that all that music in the library and then all that classical, that Western music collection down there, all that stuff came out of improvisation.
Yeah.
And yet improvisation wasn't encouraged because we had this wall of notation.
Yeah.
that was in the way. Books, 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 all this paper, 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 volumes, 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 you know. And you would never guess that on the other side of this was Francesco Landini, some blind Italian composer. His fragments, you know, were just all that you knew about him. And you'd never be able to conceive of him just sitting down and pouring out music, you know. Everything had to be documented.
Right.
Everything had to come from some kind of a written source, maybe carved in a rock or anything like that. But you always had to have documents. It wasn't enough to say, well, I know that this had to be improvised. I mean, they just didn't, you know, when they were doing these things in the caves, they didn't have paper yet. You know,
Right.
They were probably making strokes in the dirt or something, you know, if they were notating it, you know, sand painting.
Yeah. Do you have particular favorite recordings of yourself?
I think I finally made one pretty good solo I just want to mention, and that would have been in November of 1997 with Elton Dean's New Sense Band, which is a band that has a core of 3 trombones. And then there's a trumpet player, sax, cello, contrabass, piano, and drums. I think I finally just put something up there in nice, broad strokes. And I'm making a few bobbles and a few clams here and there, but basically, it says to me, you've finally gotten yourself inside of that horn. You finally are connecting with the rest of the cosmos, and you are finally making a statement that's coherent and can be understood
Wow.
by any human being, you know, any other human being. I don't care what culture they're from. If they heard this, they would have, you know, I'm doing it so broadly that they would have, that it would be something where they could hang on to and follow everything that happens along the way.
No, you must hold yourself to a pretty high standard, I think, if you feel in 97 you are finally happy with or pleased.
Yeah, I finally said I made a statement, because in the past I've always said, well, I have my moments, but now here's a moment. Here's a 7-minute moment, not a 3-second moment or a split-second moment or a good chorus of something. But I finally made a 7-minute statement, you know, building. And I have to hold myself up to the great architects of my tradition, like Herbie Nichols and Monk and Archie Shepp and so forth. And I have to say, well, I think this is the closest I've gotten so far.
Yeah.
So I have to have high standards.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the standards that have been set for me by these people, and these are the standards that I have to come up to somehow.
Well.
You know, I'm playing basketball with Michael Jordan.
Yeah. You've got a tradition to hold up to. Well, I hope you get there again soon.
Me too, Mark. Me too. It seems that, for me anyway, large segments of not being out in the public performance arena, large segments of time go by where people wonder if I'm still alive, or if he's ever going to play again,
Yeah.
or I haven't had a record from him in 10 years and
Yeah.
so forth. Well, that's mainly because I'm basically a working guy. The only way I know how to get money is I have to do a job.
Right.
If I can't get it through the music, I get another job.
Right.
And but I go on playing music. But what happens when you take another job is that you can't spend a lot of time on the telephone looking for opportunities to
Right.
record and to promote yourself and be your own entrepreneur,
Right.
and so forth, which a lot of people are very good at. So it's only when somebody says to me, Roswell, why don't you do such and such? Here's a couple of $1,000, take a few days off, go do it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how it gets done with
Right.
me.
Yeah.
And so that's why you don't hear from me from time to time, but I'm still here.
All right.
I got a ways to go. I'll be around.
Good tune.
Thank you very much.
Well, wait.
Oh.
Hold on for just one
Okay.
second. I'd like to thank you for your for making it today.
It's been my pleasure.
And appreciate your philosophies are fascinating, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah. Your
I'm
the
still
way you talk about music and
I'm still researching. You know, for me, this last year, what it's come down to finally, after a lot of research, I realized that the harp orchestras in Egypt 6,000-7,000 years ago, that they had all the harmonic knowledge then that we have now, just as far as what the monochord can do. And so I've just been devoting myself to the monochord, and I realized that the trombone is really nothing more than an E string that's agitated with my lips and breath, as opposed to plucking and bowing and all that. It's just a different. But we're all working with the same wave.
right.
And the more that we respect the wave, and the more that we know about the wave, the better chances of our getting inside the wave and becoming the wave, and therefore controlling the wave.
All right.
And this is our basic vehicle of communication, the wave.
Gave me something to think about on the way home.
Isn't it all waves? It's all waves, isn't it? I mean, solidity is an illusion. Basically, there's not a particle in the universe. You have the illusion of solidity because some particles are of lower frequencies than others. But basically, what you have is a composite of an astounding range of frequencies from below zero to beyond infinity, and thus all this different stuff, but all vibrating, but no particles. Nobody's been able to find a particle yet. They keep digging, they think, oh, I think I've cornered it. There he is, and then they get in there and they find out it's just some kind of a coincidence of different frequencies, different vibrations happening. But there's no stuff, there's no particle, it's just a dance, some kind of vibration in space.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe we'll find a particle in the next
Maybe we
200
will.
years. Maybe we will. There he is. We finally got him.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today.
Oh, Mark,
It's been fascinating.
it's been a pleasure, man.
Good.